Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the third installment of our Penciling Out series. So glad to see such a broad cross-section of participants from across the country. We're joined today by an esteemed group of panelists. Today speak to the unique environment in New York for green affordable housing projects with presentations from our government partners at HPD and NYC on the tools at their disposal and case studies on new construction and retrofit projects from Magnuson Architecture and Planning and Curtis Ginsburg Architects. We will conclude with a presentation from our partners at the Sustainable Investment Group to get into the weeds on some of these federal, state, and local financial tools at our disposal. The Penciling Out series is a series hosted in collaboration with AIA Los Angeles and the Boston Society of Architecture. As the three largest local AIA chapters, we came together over the past few months to discuss our shared regional challenges to build green affordable housing in an environment with high construction costs, restrictive zoning, onerous permitting processes, and strict energy codes. These webinars aim to educate members on how to stack financing, making green, decarbonized, affordable housing a feasible reality for the future. In today's session, we're going to focus on the New York context and unpack the programs, tools, and challenges we face here in New York. Keeping it brief, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Leone at HPD to kick us off. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Jen Leone, Chief Sustainability Officer and Assistant Commissioner at HPD, and just a little cool cheat sheet of some of the cool work that we do through our agency. Next slide. So for anybody who doesn't know about HPD, the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development is the largest municipal developer of affordable housing in the nation. We build and preserve a lot of units of housing each year. We're a city agency. We do not do public housing. This is through public-private partnerships. And we do a lot of really ambitious work from the housing side and from the climate side. Next slide. We've always had, or as long as I've been around, a pretty strong commitment to climate and sustainability at HPD. However, in this administration, we outlined through our Blueprint for Housing and Homelessness and Plan YC a really ambitious goal to fast track equitable decarbonization and beneficial electrification to serve low-income households. And that is the work we do at HPD. But also thinking about policies on decarbonization citywide. We aim to do this through two really main avenues: releasing sustainable design guidelines that create a clear and equitable pathway to decarbonization, but also to health and resiliency and other best practices related to housing, and by incubating new ideas to scale beneficial electrification and resiliency. Next slide. As noted, we have pretty ambitious design guidelines for the work that we subsidize. We have different guidelines for preservation and new construction, of course, different scales of work. And what's really critical here is that we outline baseline criteria, which are mandatory, to ensure best practices for all of our projects. And when I say best practices, again, I'm talking about climate, sustainability, resiliency, health, and affordability. We also baked in optional reach criteria that are more ambitious, and they signal the future direction of where we hope to go with our guidelines and really the gold standard of decarbonization for our projects. Next slide. Just a couple highlights in our design guidelines, and it's important for setting the stage when we talk about things penciling out, right? Because what is the baseline that we expect of our projects? For mod rehabs, compliance with Local Law 97, which is New York City's decarbonization law for buildings that are subject to 97, enhanced energy and water efficiency for all of our projects, solar where it's deemed feasible by HPD through our Solar Where Feasible program. And for gut and sub rehabs, it's a different and higher set of standards. All of our sub and gut rehabs are subject to Enterprise Green Communities or LEED Gold or above. Strategic electrification. We're really aiming to electrify our buildings where it makes sense, where it's beneficial, where there's a true cost benefit in these projects, which are doing a lot of work. Solar, where feasible, also required in our rehabs. And we've started rolling in cooling requirements for seniors, the ability to cool for all projects. Most of our sub and gut rehabs are integrating cooling to the extent they can. And finally, like our new construction projects, every one of our HPD projects has to do a resiliency risk exposure screening and address the needs in flood-prone, current and future flood-prone areas. Next slide. Our new construction design guidelines are even more ambitious. All buildings have electric heating, hot water, and appliances. Everything, all residential uses and critical equipment need to be elevated above not just the current mandatory flood levels, but 2080's projected flood levels. It's really important for us. And on the topic of penciling out, we're really trying to value in things that we know could be very costly later if they're not addressed today. We require a place of refuge in all senior housing projects. And our REACH criteria, among some of the highlights, are Passive House or DOE Zero Energy Ready Home certification, and criteria about low embodied carbon, zero waste, and so on. Next slide. So this panel is about how do these things pencil out, and how do we really support our ambitious standards? First of all, as I noted, there's certain things that are baseline and mandatory across our projects, right? These are ones we feel are important enough that they are baseline for the work we do. But when we think about how we support the more ambitious and REACH criteria, we really tried to do something different than the old way of doing things. And you'll hear more later about capital stacks and the complexity of putting together an affordable housing deal. But the old way, everything in blue, there's a very complex set of different funding sources that make up an affordable housing project, like the ones we provide at HPD: loans, subsidy, LIHTC, owner equity, all these pieces and parts. This is only some of them. And if you were trying to do an ambitious climate forward project, you had to cobble together a bunch of other incentives from NYCERDA, which is our state energy agency, the utilities, and whatever else you could pull together. Always, there's a big gap at the top of unmet needs. What we've been working toward, particularly with our partners at NYCERDA, which you'll hear more about later, is integrating more sources into our process and our capital stack so that we at HPD can provide as much of the capital stack as we can to really make these projects pencil out. So we've integrated new sources as what we're calling direct injection funds that are delivered through HPD, similar to the way we deliver public subsidy on our projects. So funding is kind of one-stop shopping. We also underwrite energy savings. We have ways of doing that that are pretty standardized at this point so that we can leverage additional debt on our projects. And then we do a lot of capacity building, which reduces costs over time, and to help buildings attract other sources of funding. Next slide. A couple programs, I'm just going to run through them really quickly. In 2021, I can't remember the date, we launched our joint retrofit electrification pilot that was funded by NYCERDA. This is a really ambitious project to strategically electrify the projects coming through our preservation pipeline, and specifically supporting electrification of heating and hot water, paired with always efficiency upgrades. And this is really rich source of funding. I don't know, contextually, there's a lot of people from different places on this call, on this webinar, but in New York City, electrification is really costly. We were providing up to $24,000 per dwelling unit, plus free technical support to buildings implementing these scopes. The program is now closed, but we have funded over 1,400 households in 48 buildings through our preservation pipeline. And what's really important is not just the buildings that we're strategically electrifying, but the best practices, case studies, and all the lessons learned that we roll into everything else we do. Next slide. We had a parallel initiative for new construction called our Future Housing Initiative, where we brought in very rich incentives for passive house projects that were procured as part of the HPD development process. And that program also closed, funded 14 different projects in our new construction pipeline. Next slide. We have now landed on what we see as a really long-term, big scale new initiative that we launched last summer called the Resilient and Equitable Decarbonization Initiative, or READY for short. And this is kind of a cobbling together of everything we've done before, again, done in tandem with NYC, where we've streamlined the incentive delivery even further and created a program that will evolve over time, can accept a number of different funding sources, state energy funding, which is ratepayer funding typically, and other funding sources as they come available. And currently, there's funding up to $35,000 per dwelling unit for electrification of space heating, hot water, and envelope. And again, free technical assistance and a lot of tools to help buildings navigate the complexity of electrification. Our current program is only for existing buildings. That's where we think funding is the most necessary at this point in time. Next slide. Thank you. One other really cool program that we just, as a city, launched was an offset funding program related to Local Law 97. As I noted in our READY program, we can bring in other sources of funding through the same program to expand our program and reach more buildings. In Local Law 97, it allows building owners subject to emissions limits to purchase offsets as part of their compliance plan. All of that funding, and we don't know how much it will be, goes into HPD ready projects, right? So a ton of emissions purchased funds a ton of emissions in one of HPD's ready projects. So it's really cool. It's a circular economy inside New York City to fund decarbonization where it makes more sense, which is through the ready program. Next slide. We also have tax abatements. I'm not going to go into depth here, but we have a program right now that funds a lot of repair work, but also specifically decarbonization work through a tax abatement in existing buildings. That can also be added into our capital stacks or used on its own for mid-cycle building projects. Next slide. And lastly, or almost lastly, one other thing to talk about. For us, it's really important, as I noticed, to build capacity around decarbonization. You're going to hear from the folks who do it first and are the most innovative, right? And the ones who are leading the way for decarbonization. But it's really important for us to provide resources for the rest of the teams who maybe are the second or third wave of projects decarbonizing, and they can do it much more cheaply and easily if we can take all the lessons we're learning from the leaders and rolling it into new projects and new programs so that we streamline decarbonization of our buildings. Next slide. One last thing that we do to really continue to stimulate innovation is on public lands, we run RFPs, and the winners of projects that come through our RFPs are often showcasing like the next generation of, climate or other innovation that we want to see in our portfolio. Our first big passive house RFP was launched in 2016, and now we have a large percentage of our pipeline doing passive house because we've built it up through RFP, innovation, execution, and so on. And we continue to do more like that. So I'll just end with my last slide. It's kind of a silly graphic, but it's really important, and it's the way we think of things often at HPD. We can't fund everything, right? NYC can't fund everything. We wish we had money. So every project could do the gold standard of decarbonization. What's so important is to pilot and demonstrate this work so that, as I said before, we take the lessons, we take the learnings, and we make the second and third and fourth waves of these projects more cost effective and ultimately business as usual. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Vera, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So can everyone hear me okay? Just want to make sure. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Jennifer, for that great presentation and to really lay the groundwork for the context and the challenges that we face here and the solutions in the affordable housing landscape in New York City. I'm Vera Vorapaiva. I'm a project manager at NYCERDA, specifically for the Early Design Support Program, which I will talk about later in the presentation. My background is in architecture with a focus on affordable multifamily passive house developments here in New York City. And I'm especially excited to talk to you all here today to aim to kind of bridge the gap between the design industry's stated need for support in achieving efficiency and high performance and affordability and the funding that's available and the technical resources through NYCERDA. Next slide, please. So quickly, what I'll talk about today is I'll quickly introduce NYCERDA for those of you that are unfamiliar, introduce the Buildings of Excellence program, which will be my primary focus, along with its goals and structures, talk about how we're aiming to drive scalability through data collection and transparency, and I'll cover a little bit of the funded examples of the case studies that we have to date, and lastly, offer some resources that maybe you might be able to leverage or take note from for your regional context. Next slide, please. So first of all, NYCERDA, we are the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. It's a public benefit corporation working to lead the state's transition to a clean energy economy. This is done through funding, incentives, research and development, and a wide range of clean energy programs that are available to really everyone in the New York State region, so to residents, businesses, and communities across the state. We are helping New York State's meet the ambitious climate goals. Those are outlined in the Climate Act, which call for affordable and a just transition to a clean energy economy that really stimulates jobs, promotes economic growth through green infrastructure. And of note, 35% of the climate goals percentage of benefits are allocated towards disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. So New York is advancing a suite of efforts that I mentioned, which I'm not going to be able to cover all extensively today. And this is really incentivized to an emission-free economy through the energy, building, transportation, and waste sectors. I'll be primarily focusing on the building sectors, of course, and this is done through a slew of avenues. Again, we really touch on almost everybody in New York through a range of incentives and programs. Next slide, please. I'm really including this just to show the scope of work that we cover. So NYCERDA does offer over 90 programs today. I just checked on our website, and those really cover energy efficiency, renewable energy, clean transportation, and workforce development. I really encourage you to leverage our resources. They can be daunting at first, but this slide shows ways that you can engage with NYCERDA to really look for tailored offerings that are really catering to what your projects are needed. I encourage you to use the Find a Program page, and you can filter and program it by audience and the service types to really meet the goals of your project. Next slide, please. So today I'll be tackling the multifamily and large-scale building incentives and solutions that we're focusing on at NYCERDA. Again, we're really looking to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and as we all know, the New York's building sector accounts for over a third of that, so making electrification a top priority for NYCERDA, specifically in large-scale buildings as well. We see that as a benefit to the environment, public health, and long-term affordability of the state. Next slide, please. So NYCERDA really offers a lot of incentives and opportunities for that. We have structured decarbonization roadmaps, incentives for electrification upgrades. We promote energy code and standards and provide trainings and technical avenues for the support. Next slide, please. I will focus on the Buildings of Excellence program, which really tackles the affordability in the multifamily New York City climate. So in part, the program does draw on inspiration from kind of global successful initiatives that have proved high-performance building standards that really promote tangible results in energy consumption reduction and greenhouse gas emissions. So we're really looking to reduce the energy consumption in tangible ways through the program and to demonstrate that through real-life projects, as Jennifer had mentioned, because we're unable to support every single project in this avenue. So the overall goals and targets are really to align with the climate agenda and to showcase exemplary buildings, which demonstrate this kind of innovation and really showcase where we can push the envelope. So the Building of Excellence really rewards and recognizes design, construction, and operations of these kind of buildings in all of multifamily sector. That covers market rate and affordable projects, really working to stimulate the design and development of low carbon, low emission buildings through all of New York State. And this demonstration program, the Buildings of Excellence, is a competitive focus. So it really does incentivize and reward innovation and helps to inform the future generations of these buildings. And that being said, although electrification and energy reduction is our baseline mandate, we also do reward non-energy co-benefits, improved resiliency, and overall living conditions through all of that showcase and with cost compression added on in the project. We know that these attributes really go hand in hand with high performance buildings, and we see them as a mandatory to thriving building stock in our state. Next slide, please. So since its launch in 2019, which used to be a single program, the Buildings of Excellence has expanded to have few complementary RFPs. They're really intended to support both hard cost and soft cost investigations across the market, state, and affordable housing projects, as I mentioned. These are the early design support RFP, which focuses on the early stage analysis and technical support, followed by the demonstration RFP later in the design phase, which is primarily there to offset construction hard costs allocated to the developer and design team. So again, these RFPs really work in tandem to provide a holistic support for these kind of projects. And an example of this might be that a team can study a passive house feasibility approach, showcase it to the team and developer, and then apply for the demonstration incentives to implement these kind of systems like an ERV system or a geothermal heating in the construction. And to date, we're proud to have supported 6 projects that have successfully went through both of these RFPs, and we're really excited to support this model and expand it in future rounds. Next slide, please. So the beneficiaries of these kind of systems, we really see this a holistic benefit to our buildings, starting from the individual buildings, which really gain high performance and long-term energy savings, so that can be actualized in lower utility rates for the occupants. Design practitioners benefit from the program from de-risking and building technical capacity. And also, we do offer promotion and public recognition. Building owners and developers, again, really benefit from early stage risk reduction that would typically be incurred for costs for themselves. And really, we look to implement this funding where the design decisions are most impactful early on in the process. And although a lot of this funding is geared towards case study buildings, we look for them to inform the building portfolios going on in the future for both the designers and the ownership to really integrate it as a baseline approach in their practices. And finally, a very large component of our program is the data distribution to really promote scalability. So sharing results through the demonstration projects and the early design support work really to inform the entire sector through knowledge sharing, case studies, and visibility. Next slide, please. So now, what are these kind of projects and what do they look like in a tangible way? This program targets new construction, adaptive reuse conversions, and major gut rehabs of carbon neutral. Again, we don't promote fossil fuels in any of our buildings now through the multi-family housing in both market rate and affordable sectors. On this slide, you'll see where these projects can be found and the types of projects that we support, ranging from low-rise to super tall buildings. I think some of these projects you will hear from their team later on, so we're excited to have them here. The Buildings of Excellence really is working to building the capacity and creating opportunities for project teams across the entire state, with the majority of the projects being represented in the New York City region. Next slide, please. Moving on to the early design support program. It supports the goals of high performance and carbon neutral design, all through the very early stages of the design process, again, where we found that these interventions are most impactful. This program is available now, so I have to say one of the objectives of this presentation is really speaking about penciling out and what kind of programs are available. I will say this program is available, so if you think that you have a project that aligns with this program, please don't hesitate to reach out and leverage it for your own project going forward. It caps out at $100,000 per project team to really investigate carbon neutral attributes and a range of scopes early on in the projects. These strategies are really geared towards carbon neutral strategies, but also cover a wide range of scopes, and we have found this to address and de-risk a lot of the team's own burden that they would have had to put on early on in the process, or not be able to investigate and not be able to implement these kind of strategies in their projects. So the EDS really represents the technical support arm, and along with the capacity building of the selected design firm, but also makes these key findings publicly available to ultimately drive the business models and integrate them into kind of business as usual for these design firms and across New York State as a whole. So far we have over 20 design partners that are in the program and that really cover a wide range of investigations, and 2 of which you'll hear about later. The next slide, please. The demonstration RFP is the next portion of the Buildings of Excellence program. It's a competitively funded opportunity. So really this is later on in the design process. This round has recently closed, and we are looking to launch a future round of which the details are not yet available, but I do encourage you to really, if you are interested, to subscribe to NYSERDA's Buildings of Excellence newsletter to stay informed about future funding opportunities. And as the name suggests, the RFP really supports exceptional multifamily projects. In addition to offsetting the hard cost of these projects, the demonstration program is also looking for market transformation, and this is done through performance and data collection, which is a really robust avenue of this program. We also publicly share the construction operational data, the construction costs and the operational data, and collate all of this on the BOE microsite. These projects really demonstrate and are intended to demonstrate the real cost reductions and substantial energy savings in real life examples and improved resiliency. So a key feature of this program is really for commitment to performance validation. So NYSERDA analyzes operational data and compares it to modeled projections to evaluate the actual building performance. And we're working to collect this data and to make this available so that teams can look at projects of their similar typology to set a baseline for greater market transformation. Next slide, please. So this slide here shows the cumulative data of the demonstration projects that we've collected. Successfully, we've been able to support 65 projects with over $1 million of funding through the demonstration RFP, 47 of which are affordable, majorly affordable housing. And collectively, this program has supported over 8,000 units across New York State. Notably, we've had the latest round of 87% of it being in disadvantaged communities, and they've all supported kind of aligned with the climate agenda and have offered many community services and green spaces, which we're proud of. A lot of the projects in the recent rounds have supported geothermal adoption, so more projects are committing to geothermal systems. And we've seen an uptick in passive house certification. So 70% of the awarded projects in the latest rounds are all pursuing passive house in the latest round. Sorry. And next slide, please. So again, this data collection and distribution is a really strong component of the program, and we see that as a catalyst to market transformation. The program has evolved. So an example of that will be that we're adapting to the market conditions. In round 1 and 2, fossil fuel systems were allowed in the program, and with round 3 onward, no fossil fuels were supported, signifying a major milestone in electrification that we're seeing across the market. Recent rounds have incentivized geothermal systems and advanced technologies like the reduction of global warming potential. So we're excited to see the continuation of supporting new and innovative strategies across the sector. We've seen earlier on in the rounds a demonstration of achievable low-rise net zero buildings, and we're now interested in targeting the demonstration of high-rise typologies and demonstrating that that's possible to achieve the energy performance standards at cost-competitive prices. And we believe truly to shift the market, along with collecting this data, we do need to have feedback and transparency and shared learnings. So again, the demonstration program is unique that we collect the data for 2 years after the building has been operated and compare that to the modeled performance that's submitted early on in the process. We collect and make available the cost data, which includes the hard costs and any soft costs for third-party verifications, and really look to present this in a digestible data set for all project typologies to de-risk involvement for future teams. Next slide, please. I have just a couple more really quickly. So what does this look like in practice? I think the Buildings of Excellence early design support really addresses kind of the next level of what's on the horizon, and we're excited to support that. To date, we've had a very wide range of scopes studied, and those include a wide focus on passive house and high performance strategies and embodied carbon reduction and envelope and system analysis. The program itself is written in a way where we offer flexibility for design partners to explore the next phase of solutions that we see on the horizon. So again, I do encourage you to leverage this funding, whether that's to study ways for allowing your projects to pencil out or to really make financial cases for optimized systems that you're wanting to implement in your projects. And the next slide shows an example of this work. On this page, you will see a finished report by Palkashuchi Architects, which looked at affordability of electrification utility rates through peak rate and demand reduction in affordable housing in New York City. So that's available on our website. Along with the Buildings of Excellence, NYSERDA website for demonstration showcases on the right here, showcases the database of buildings where you can learn a lot about what they're doing and their metrics. So I encourage you to check that out. And finally, before I hand it off to the next presenters, I do want to shout out some available incentives that are relevant to this conversation. So as I mentioned, the Buildings of Excellence demonstration and early design support are available. Well, demonstration is not available now, but the early design support is. Along with that, we also offer the Buildings Cleaner Community Competition, and that's there to support regionally significant projects. We also have Building Better Homes programs, which is geared towards single family and townhomes, so smaller scale, and a larger scale, the large scale thermal program, which is there to incentivize large scale thermal systems in single and multiple buildings. So with that, I'll hand it over to our next presenters, who will dive into some of the projects that have worked alongside NYSERDA on their projects. Thank you.
Great, Sarah. Take it away. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the Q&A box as well while we go along.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Beyer. I'm Associate Principal and Director of Sustainability at Magnuson Architecture and Planning. And I'd like to share with you a case study of one of our high-performance, healthy buildings and how its major features play out from a financial perspective. In the next slide. This project received early design support research funding through NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence Program Round 3. The early design support gave us the ability to prove out concepts specific for this project, which led it to become a demonstration award winner in Round 4. Many of the lessons learned in this study, we are also presenting to clients in other projects. So the tools we are creating are helping us seek better outcomes for all of our projects. The next slide. This CDA building is a new affordable housing building located in Harlem for seniors from the community. It will have 211 apartments in 28 stories, and it's planning to start construction next year. The next slide. These are the core measures that we took above code minimum to make this building healthier and higher performing and improve the outcome for its owners and occupants far into the future. This is a passive house certified building using geothermal for all heating, cooling, and hot water, and has significant on-site solar renewables. I'll go over these features from a cost-benefit perspective. So next slide. Starting off with ensuring you are cost-effectively creating the most efficient building, we have found that passive house is the most reliable strategy. However, the team was concerned about costs, so we studied the cost-benefit in depth. The first part of our passive house study focused on proving the case for energy recovery ventilation. Because if a project does not plan for these early, it can be harder to incorporate later. ERVs are a required component of passive house and a significant portion of the cost differential. At the moment, Energy Code does not require apartments to provide ventilation through ERVs if a project's flow rates are kept at code minimum. So we sought to prove both the health and financial case for ERVs. Shown here are the results from the financial portion of the study. We compared the construction cost to the energy savings between exhaust only with trickle vents to energy recovery ventilation. From a health perspective, research by the DOE and others is showing that trickle vents are not providing the makeup air that we expect them to. We also conducted a separate particulate matter and oxygen level ventilation study using early phase funding from a different project, which we also presented to this client. The short and simple paybacks shown here were acceptable to the team, and the health benefits of ERVs compelling, so we locked in the ventilation strategy of passive house first. Go to the next slide. Then it made sense using early design support funds to study the full cost to go to passive house certification. We created a detailed spreadsheet of every specification in hard and soft costs that we would need to adjust even slightly between our baseline building, which is Enterprise Green Community Certification, which is the lowest requirement for all affordable housing, and passive house. The GC is a development partner, so they provided the differential cost estimates. To really understand what it would take for your project to reach passive house, it is best to do a comparison of your building to a passive house version of itself. You go to the next slide. So here are the results. With a baseline for affordable housing, that is, okay, sorry, this slide's a little, anyway, I'll explain it. The baseline for affordable housing is already 15% more efficient than code minimum already. And the additional increased cost to move to passive house is only 1.5% of total construction costs. The conservative projection of yearly operational savings are about $70,000 a year, or about 30% of the utility bills. You go to the next slide. But we're not done yet. This 1.5% increase does not take into account the savings from a smaller mechanical system, which passive house can reliably accomplish. A less efficient building would need many more boreholes for the geothermal system. The lot area would actually not be big enough, so we would need a hybrid system, and the increased cost of the mechanical system would be $850,000. Once you take into account the yearly energy savings and the reduced mechanical system size, passive house has a simple payback of 12 years. It takes time to do these calculations, and we understand they cannot be done on every project, and we have the benefit of NYSERDA's early phase funding. But once you do this for one project, it is simpler to apply the same cost-benefit perspective to the next one. It's important for architects to remind ourselves that we are managers of the design process, just as much as we are of the design of the buildings themselves. So what questions are your client asking about passive house, and use the design support funding to help answer those questions. We go to the next slide. So the two aspects of this project made geothermal the ideal choice for this all-electric building. First, the ratio between the gross square footage of the building and the lot area, and the fact that this building is a passive house, allowed us to serve all of the building's heating, cooling, and hot water needs with the geothermal system. This keeps things simple, which reduces costs and allows us to obtain all the operational and efficiency benefits of a geothermal system. The second is that there are incentives in place now to encourage the use of geothermal. These are through the utility and through the federal IRA tax credits. Right now, geothermal is about a third more expensive than air source VRF systems, but with the incentives, they can actually be slightly cheaper. Also, it is more efficient than a VRF system because we are exchanging heat with the ground and not the air, which is a lot more variable. So the geothermal has both upfront and long-term financial benefits. Go to the next slide. But there are many more reasons this project is going with geothermal, including benefits that will have a return financially to the life cycle of the project, but are hard to quantify. Being next to the elevated train, as you can see here, we have a significant noise pollution to address, and avoiding penetrations in the facade is extremely helpful. Additionally, we are avoiding long refrigerant runs, which now need to be enclosed in fire-rated construction. It's a long-lasting system as well and has reduced maintenance cost. And each unit can be in heating or cooling mode as residents prefer. From the utilities perspective, geothermal in buildings is extremely beneficial because it reduces peak loads on the grid. This is because the thermal energy that we're tapping into is consistent, as opposed to the air source, which changes with the weather. For example, when we experience heat waves, air source type equipment will need more electricity to keep things cool when geothermal stays the same. Utilities benefit greatly from buildings having geothermal systems because it reduces the need to turn on or build expensive peaker plants for those heat waves. So if you think of tax incentives as a collective way for us to work together to scale technologies that have financial benefits for all of us, then smart incentives like those supporting geothermal is important for us to continue. The next slide, please. Some words of caution, though, when looking to use the system. It requires commitment early in design so that borehole tests can be completed. Also, we need to better understand and reduce the embodied carbon impact of the system. Although we believe the technology is arriving to reduce the impact, we will especially be looking to electrify drilling equipment. Go to the next slide. So another important aspect of passive house multifamily buildings in our climate is that they are cooling demand dominated. This is a benefit that we can leverage in the geothermal system as well. The next slide, please. It's important that the geothermal bore field be sized to keep the ground in thermal balance. In other words, we don't want to be taking out or putting in too much heat so that the stable ground temperature under the building does not shift over time. This is because the equipment inside the building is designed to operate at peak efficiency within a certain temperature range. Because our passive house building is cooling demand dominated, we have excess heat that we don't want to send into the ground. So we can take advantage of this and use it to make our domestic hot water. But in fact, we have even more excess heat than can be absorbed by the hot water demand, and we will have even more so as our climate warms. The most cost-effective option is to expel extra heat into the air, and this is easily done with a dry cooler on the roof. However, the team recently received calculations indicating that the hot water load of the existing building to the north, which is owned by the same client, matches the amount of excess heat that we have. So we will design a hookup in the bore field so that when this northern building's electrification renovation happens in the future, we can connect to the geothermal system and make the hot water. When this happens, the dry cooler will run rarely, if at all. In summary, it's a lot simpler to eject excess heat than it is to create it. So a passive house multifamily building is a great match for a geothermal system and provides a way to plan strategically to make the most out of our investments. The next slide, please. This building's exterior walls will be made of prefabricated Dextol panels. The embodied carbon savings of these prefabricated panels for phases A1 through A3, so that's material extraction through fabrication, are 12% better than site-built baseline. They also provide better quality controlled product and improved working conditions because they are made in the factory. The panels provide savings to the project because we are under prevailing wage requirements. These factory-built panels, therefore, avoid that additional labor cost. The next slide, please. A south-facing portion of the rain screen facade cladding on the deck stall panels will be building integrated photovoltaics, and there's solar on the roof as well. These provide about 15% of the building's electricity use. We don't have the numbers yet for the BIPV, but the rooftop solar, using New York Sun and tax credits, the payback for the solar is 11.8 years. Similar to the reasons to support geothermal, creating a healthy economy should include collectively supporting point-of-use renewables. It's cost-effective for us all to do so, for tax credits to be leveraged to provide more electrons to the grid this way, because it's maintained by the building owner and not the utility. It doesn't require additional land or infrastructure for siting, and it saves utility money because it does not require additional transmission lines. Go to the next slide. So as you probably heard, solar panels embodied carbon can also be high. So is it worth it? As part of our study, we investigated that as well. The answer is yes. They start saving carbon within a few years, and it's also a technology that's consistently improving, like batteries. Of course, we also need to make sure that the raw materials come from ethical sourcing practices and that we reuse the materials at the end of their 30 to 35-year lifespan, which is only possible with this technology because you can't recycle fossil fuels after they've been burned. Point-of-use solar is also better than grid solar because we avoid transmission losses, as mentioned, or the impact of source energy. This table is showing every year that the on-site solar in New York City is saving the amount of carbon that would otherwise need to be absorbed by 2,662 mature trees every year. Go to the next slide. This building will be in the flood zone by 2050. HPD requires, as you heard, that we plan for this, and we're following Appendix G requirements. We are raising the mechanical systems and residential entry and including wet and dry flood proofing measures. This does increase the cost by a bit, but not by much because in this project, because the cellar space in this building is expensive because of the high water table. So it's best we minimize that size anyway. We also have some costs, saved some costs to our supportive excavation work by allowing for more sloped earth and shorter piles. It's a complicated and small site. As with every project, we need to optimize every move we make. Go to the next slide. In summary, here are the ways to manage increased costs, real or perceived, from high performance and healthy design strategies. Buildings are enormous investments by society into our future. And when we build new ones, that is the moment when just a small improvement to the design can have massive benefits. Sometimes those improvements don't have to cost more, or their costs are offset by savings in another system in the building. Another hurdle that occurs are when those costs are not fully understood or their payback is not able to be calculated. Long-term quality of life benefits, durability, and resiliency are also hard to quantify, but they're very real costs. To be able to maximize the payback of all the investments we are making in the built environment, we need to get much better at following the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Go to the next slide. As a final note, even if changing the composition of our atmosphere dramatically and quickly as we're doing doesn't scare you, the measures we're talking about, the renewable and regenerative economy we have within our grasp, is just plain better. For one thing, we will run out of the physical material the old way at some point in the near future. The new way of obtaining energy and manufacturing goods can create a more thriving society because they are inherently more efficient and healthier technologies. And therefore, they will lift all boats, especially when they become primary. We don't need to frame carbon smart or sustainable buildings as all about climate change. We are talking about measures that are just better for us overall, even if climate change wasn't a thing. And we're talking about strategic investments that have enormous returns on multiple fronts: energy savings, healthier buildings throughout their entire life cycle. The main reason that some sustainability measures may cost more is not because they physically must. It's because we haven't created a system yet that rewards their true value. And that's all within our collective control to fix.
Super interesting, Sarah. Crystal, you want to walk us through our next case study?
Hi, I'm Crystal Ling. I'm Director of Sustainability at Curtis Ginsburg Architects, and we've reached the retrofit portion of our presentation today. Next slide, please. So to give you a little bit of context, since I know people are joining from different areas, in New York City, roughly 80% of the New York City housing stock is over 50 years old. So there's actually a lot to do in retrofitting and making existing buildings energy efficient, which could also have a significant payback, and the carbon used to generate to heat and cool, and also our water for the buildings. So as part of our 2030 AIA commitment, we do track our buildings and our modeled energy. So we're seeing that the existing building projects that we have is typically around 100 to 150 in EUI. We are working on, it varies by project to project, moderate to substantial rehabs, and we're seeing a 40 to 70% savings in the operational energy of them. And over time, that is a significant contributor to carbon. Next slide, please. Today, I'll talk about the Three Arts Club. It is a landmark building that we are studying to be passive house. The existing building is from 1927, and it was originally a women's residence, so they are SROs. We are converting them to be efficiency studios. It will maintain some of the existing character and integrate some of the cultural significance of it, including the music room and libraries. Next slide. And the deep energy retrofit scope is to repair the facade, of course, and then improve the building envelope through windows, roof, and interior insulation. We are also providing ERV ventilation here, as well as electrified heating and cooling and hot water. And then we will meet the criteria of enterprise green communities, including the low VOC paints and sealants, as well as Energy Star and LED lighting to reduce the energy load. Next slide. And we do have a small solar on top. So in terms of the funding stack, we are using the LIHTC and HPD loans. The unique aspect about this building is it was recently designated as state and national historic places, so that unlocked the historical tax credits for us. The requirements of the historical tax credits is to renovate them per the standards of the National Park Service and LPC in New York. They have specific guidelines that would preserve the historical look of the building. So sometimes that doesn't always go hand in hand with our sustainability initiatives. So that is something we have to balance in our design, as well as the project is receiving incentives from NYSERDA and the programs that was discussed by Vera. Next slide. So this project's incentives were the Building of Excellence. It was a demonstration project, which will go towards hard costs and soft costs. The design team also applied for their early design support to study in the early stages the passive house compliance path for preservation projects. That would be the Enerfit of Passive House International, which leads us to study the performance of the envelopes and the windows, as well as set what kind of HVAC performance that will have. For those that might not know as much about Enerfit, there is 2 compliance paths, a performance path that is similar to what a traditional passive house standard modeling would be, Or there's a component path, which is more adaptable to our type of project since we cannot be insulating on the outside for this historical project, and might also be applicable if you are doing some kind of staged retrofit intervention. Next slide. And here is our passive house compliance path criteria. There are minimum thresholds that we need to meet, as well as air sealing goals and efficiencies of our HVAC systems. That needs to go into the thinking. And next slide. So part of that early design study, we did investigate the exterior walls, which is critical in rehabs to understand the existing conditions so you don't run into project overruns later. And then also factor in the feasibility of the sustainability goals that we want to set here. So the existing building is a terracotta masonry. We did some probes. We also did modeling, hydrothermal modeling of the existing condition and our proposed condition to make sure that it would still continue to perform as it does and dry out as this older wall type is meant to do. The requirements that we have in getting our historical funding is that we're limited to interior, growing the interior by 4 inches. So that does significantly limit our potential to increase the R value of the walls. Next slide. And as we're doing this, this chart is not necessarily for this project, but as we're studying the different packages, we would also be looking at the different paybacks and seeing how that might make sense and how we would organize the different together, because unlike new construction, you can pick and choose because you do have some existing systems there already. Next slide. One of the passive house criteria is building tightness. And when we think about that for our landmarks project, we do have some certain spaces that are historical that we would want to keep, but are difficult to air seal because they have historical windows and openings that we are not planning to replace. So the idea was to take some of the areas out of the passive house design envelope. They would kind of be air sealed at the interior, and the room might be a little more leaky than what the threshold would require. Next slide. The opportunity that we did have here, this building was partially occupied. It will be gutted on the interior since we are changing the rooming units into efficiency studios. So there was a more opportunity to increase the air tightness. That might be a little more difficult if this was a straight up preservation jobs where tenants are remaining in place. But we've also done blower door tests on existing buildings, and depending on your existing buildings, the air tightness might be really good to begin with, and you would only have to improve upon that. So I wouldn't let doing a preservation job deter you from trying to achieve those higher air tightness targets. Next. And this is the condition that we were speaking about earlier, where we are trying to preserve the historical characters. They have existing windows that we will improve on the air sealing, but will not necessarily replace. That could be challenging, and also significant impact to the cost. And that's kind of what factored into what would be the passive house components. Next slide. And you can't talk about a landmark projects without talking a little bit about windows. So we had to bring back the historical character of the windows. They are historically wood double hung windows. On the primary facade, we are proposing wood windows. but there is less scrutiny on the secondary facades. So in the secondary facades, we are choosing to do a more economical UPVC windows. They would have thicker sightline than the original, which is being scrutinized per the landmarks requirement. So that's kind of like how we balance the cost when we're making these suggestions and upgrades. Next slide. As well as we really need to study the existing structures and the existing conditions, and rarely in rehabs is there a one solution that fits all. So we are moving into heat pumps for this project. There are existing louvers on the project already, so there's actually two solutions for this building, which is where we have the louvers. We would do the package terminal heat pumps. That would reduce kind of the refrigerant, and actually makes a lot of sense here because the louvers are on the lower floors. So then on the upper floors where the windows do not have louvers, they would have a VRF system, and the refrigerants would be closer to the outdoor unit, which would be located on the roof. And it is a significant savings not to have to run all those refrigerants up to the roofs, since these buildings didn't have these systems before. I would echo Sarah into saying that while including the VRFs and ERVs are significant impacts into an existing building that doesn't have those infrastructures already, definitely in a new construction, if you can, you should incorporate it, because it is a lot of work to rehab the structure, find the space for these newer systems. Next slide. And then, so getting to the operational carbon that we intend to save, the existing building was performing at about 100 to 125 kBTU per square feet. Keep in mind that that is at partial capacity. That wasn't at full capacity. We do intend with the passive house retrofit to get down to about 60% at 40. And then in the chart there below, you can kind of see what we're running up against in these rehabs. If you did nothing, it would grow exponentially. And then for this renovation, it kind of stabilizes it, and actually also could be in line with new construction. Next slide. As well as the benefits of rehab is the saved embodied carbon. We have saved the most significant impact to the embodied carbon, which is the building structures. We are renovating the mechanical systems, which would be spending the operational carbon over time to be more efficient, and some interiors. So we are comparing it in this example to a baseline passive house study. So in the 25 years, it would be equal, but also keep in mind that your operational carbon would keep growing. And then and if we also compared it to maybe a baseline linoleum, then our reuse situation would definitely look a lot better on the embodied or overall carbon front. So with that, I am kind of wrapping up the overall performance of this building.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Colin, you want to walk us through Sustainable Investment Group's presentation?
Sure. So I'm Colin Miller. I'm Regional Director on the East Coast here at Sustainable Investment Group. We're part of a company called TwoSud. And if you could scroll to the next slide, please. So this kind of gives you an idea of who we are and how big of a company we are. I'm not going to go too much into this in the interest of time. So next slide, please. Next slide. All right. So some of the services that we provide around decarbonization are pretty standard. They've been gone over by Crystal, Sarah, and a few other people in their presentations as well. It's pretty similar. We start out with energy modeling, go through strategic planning, kind of get an idea of what the client's goals and needs are. And then we customize the project based on those goals and the funding requirements and what we think is feasible from a standpoint of what kind of funding we can attain. Next, we look into the financing and incentive management, and then also how we sort of roadmap the project. Next slide, please. From there, we kind of take a look at like what the benefits of what we're trying to do. This is kind of what the benefits of a deep retrofit project across the board are. Adaptability, if you're going to turn it into an adaptive reuse project later on. Some of the new solutions that you have from an MEP standpoint are more adaptable than others. The heat pumps, obviously, you can move those around and do what you need as it needs for the building change. It's future-proofing your building and helps align it better in the market. Next slide, please. So with a deep energy retrofit, especially in New York and Boston, a little bit towards California as well, it really does start out with how do you get the initial surveys and the initial studies funded. Here in New York, we definitely have the benefit of having a resource like NYSERDA, which is indispensable in getting a lot of these projects up across the ground. And then you combine that with the green financing and some of the other projects or some of the other elements that Monty's going to speak about, you really do have then a viable project. I'm sure everybody who's done engineering from a carbon perspective, energy studies and things along those lines have sort of the same shared pain point, which is, you do a lot of work a lot of times that really doesn't go anywhere. So this helps address that. Next slide, please. This is my contact information. If anybody needs to get a hold of me, if you've got any questions specific to this stuff, I'm happy to help out. And with that, I'll hand it off to Monty.
Hello. Bria, are we? I don't see myself on the screen. Not that I need to. I'd rather not.
You're good to go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, my name is Monty Hillman with Sustainable Investment Group. I lead a department called Climate Investment Solutions. I came to SIG about 2 years ago. 28 years in sustainability, 20 of it at the St. Paul Port Authority. Kind of like the folks from HPD, we were public sector, but quasi-governmental. We did joint ventures with private sector developers. I'm a licensed real estate broker. We were the PACE administrator for the last 15 years for the entire state of Minnesota. So 350 property assessed clean energy financing deals came across my credit committee. And we, in these joint ventures, we would be responsible for our half of the partnership in relation to financing, refinancing, leasing, et cetera. So I had a pretty good crash course in public financing, commercial real estate financing, new market tax credits we did, et cetera. And so like an affordable project, 24 to 36 different funding sources would go into a typical Port Authority project. Not affordable housing. That's not really what we did. So I'm on as much of a learning journey as many of you as to how to apply some of these tools to affordable housing projects. I'm going to run you through how we look at it and give you a few examples that I think may be eye-opening. So we talk to our clients about green value creation, the idea that you can add to asset value by making smart decisions around this stuff from pre-design through exit, taking a green approach all along the value chain there. You obviously understand in New York Local Law 97, the concept of stranded assets and brown discounts. Next slide, please. And a lot of what I focus on is the Inflation Reduction Act. So let me talk about the heavy hitters, if you will, the things that it's impossible for someone who, for example, is in a design firm to completely understand how each of these tools work and how to put them together in a cash flow and how do they impact investment returns. But being conversant that these are the tools out there to help talk to owners and make sure you've got folks on board that are able to access these and know what works and what doesn't in a given situation. So the big one here is the investment tax credit for solar, geothermal, thermal energy storage, battery storage, et cetera, from 6 to 70%. If you are pretty bad at it, you might get a 6% tax credit. we should be able to land around 50% with the relative bonuses you can get. The thing we love about the ITC is ITC has been around for 20 some years. It's blinked on, it's blinked off. It's supposed to have sunset, survived multiple Democratic and Republican administrations. The thing we love about the ITC is there's no limit or application. So it's not like chasing LIHTC allocation. It's not like chasing new market tax credit allocation. You design these systems, you follow the guidance, you do the math, you document the crap out of it. You put that stuff in a folder, you file a 2-page tax form, and you get this tax credit. Between you and your tax attorney and the Lord, I say. We'll come back around in this affordable housing context. The 45L tax credit, up to $5,000 per multifamily unit. We'll come back to that. The 179D deduction, also been around for 20 some years, can be up to $5.65 per square foot. It was supercharged under the IRA. And for the next 2 years, through the end of 2026, you can get this for beating 2007 energy code by 50%. And so I imagine a lot of your projects, all of your projects are probably beating 2007 energy code by 50%. The solar and geothermal equipment is also energy property that is available for accelerated depreciation. It's 5-year maker's property, helps lower a corporate taxable income off of a project. Maker's depreciation, they call it. And you also may be able to get bonus depreciation. Bonus depreciation was another huge pot of depreciation you could take in year one, that we got from Trump in 2017. And I think we are going to see it come back here in this tax bill. Rebates, grants, loans, Department of Energy and Loan Programs Office, LPO Loan Programs Office is funding money to basically green banks across the country to get that down into projects. We're going to come back to LPO. The home energy rebates, up to $14,000 per multifamily unit. New York was the first state in the country to have their home energy rebate program under the Inflation Reduction Act up and running last summer. Right now, it's restricted to only 1 to 4 unit buildings, but not a super great fit for this context. And EPA's GGRF, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $27 billion in grants in the IRA. Great, right? That money really went to these 3 organizations and others to help stand up revolving loan funds and green banks around the country. Next slide. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, Inflation Reduction Act, I heard that's getting repealed. That's all going to vaporize, right? And not so. For the last 6 months or so, I've been traveling the country talking a lot about the IRA crystal ball. And just in the last 2 days, things are getting even hotter. So generally, we've said for the last several months, this is across industry groups, lobbyists, attorneys, all sorts of folks around the country that are trying to figure out what's going on here. The building-related energy tax treatments, we think, are generally going to do okay. There was a letter, 17 House Republicans in November wrote Speaker Johnson a letter saying, don't mess up these energy credits. A month ago, Representative Garabino from New York wrote a similar letter to the Speaker, and now 21 House Republicans had signed on to it. But most importantly, it's getting real. This is all going to get sorted out in this tax bill. And on Sunday, if you look at the Wall Street Journal from Sunday, there was an op-ed from the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Chair Guthrie. He wrote an op-ed called something like A Reasonable Approach to Reconciliation, something like that. It was the announcement of what was a hearing actually right now today. That House committee, the House Energy and Commerce Committee, is reviewing and marking up the first iteration of a bill. And they released it on Sunday, so we already know what's in it. The ITC, the heavy hitter, they're talking about shortening it, phasing it out again, from 2034 to potentially as early as 2027 or 2028. Again, the political winds could change in that time frame, and this bill is obviously going to get negotiated over the next few months until it gets finished. But accelerating the phase out of the ITC is definitely on the table. The elimination of direct pay and transferability. The IRA allowed tax-exempt entities to get a check instead of a tax credit because they don't need one. and it allowed for-profit entities to sell the tax credit very simply without creating a tax equity partnership. Direct pay is going to be a huge problem for my municipal clients. Think mush market folks, university schools, hospitals that can take advantage of direct pay. And transferability is going to be a problem for developers and owners looking to monetize the tax credit rather than use it against tax liability, which they may not have. We know there are some threats. In that same letter and in the same bill that's being addressed right now, there is at least 14 things I count that they specifically have called out. The $27 billion EPA greenhouse gas reduction fund. It's already in court. They mean to rescind it by legislation. We will get probably EVs cut maybe by the end of this year instead of next decade. The EV credit, the LPO money is going to be, that I referenced, is those $80 billion. So you see between 20 or 27 billion in GGRF and 80 billion at LPO, there's going to be a talking point of 100 to 200 billion dollars was chopped out of the Green New Deal, and that's probably going to be true. But these building-related tax treatment folks really, I think, understand, and there's a lot of smart folks, especially in the real estate world, telling folks not to mess them up. Next slide, please. New versus retrofit. What should you be looking at? For new construction, certainly that ITC. It's for geothermal, not air source heat pumps, and only for building heating and cooling equipment, not pools, not ice rinks, etc. The ability to cost neutralize that move to geothermal, I'm going to show you in a second here. The solar, a simple rooftop solar array with energy property depreciation, with the tax credits, with utility incentives, gets down about a 4 or 5 year simple payback. And again, that direct pay and transferability helps it be utilized across ownership profiles. The 45L tax credit for new construction gets monetized within the same tax equity structure as a low-income housing tax credit. So it doesn't require the addition of a whole new tax equity partnership and a whole lot of work. Because you're already doing it, it's going to show up as one additional line item in a tax equity structure. The home energy rebates, up to $14,000 per unit, we talked about those. On the retrofit side, yes, the ITC, and yes, the home energy rebates. But I do want to talk about PACE for a second here. I will note right off the bat, PACE doesn't really play well with LIHTC for a variety of convoluted reasons. And PACE in New York has been struggling to get off the ground, but there is some proposed revisions coming. But folks should be thinking about PACE to stack with these IRA incentives for local law 97 avoidance financing. PACE can look backwards 3 years in New York to refinance expensive equity or mezzanine debt, to rebuild reserves or pay down senior debt. This is what a lot of these building owners, or excuse me, lenders, senior lenders want to see reserves built up and balances brought down. You see what some of the common uses of PACE is. And I understand the legislative update that is being proposed would add water conservation, resiliency measures as eligible costs, and remove the savings to investment ratio, which was a present value calculation of energy savings, which had to be greater than the cost of the project. And it was hanging things up oftentimes. New construction is eligible for PACE, must be all electric. That 179D deduction can be taken every 3 years for a phased resource efficient decarbonization approach. And very importantly for design firms on the call, tax exempt clients can assign, so your mush market folks, your municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals can assign this tax deduction to the design team to reduce the firm's income tax liability. And this could be, as I understand from several of my partners in the design world that use this and have for years, a very significant impact to your company's bottom line. Next slide, please. Okay, here's some of the magic when it comes to geothermal. When you're thinking of geothermal, don't necessarily hang your hat on needing a bunch of land for a well field. There are next generation geothermal technologies, one invented here at the University of Minnesota called Darcy, D-A-R-C-Y. and they're aquifer based. So they drill and put the heat exchanger down in the aquifer, and one well can generate 100 tons of cooling, or like 150,000 square foot building. 1, 2 wells, 3 or 4 wells in big buildings. There's a competitor out of Europe called DCL that has been around for 10 or 15 years, just coming into the US market as well. But given the IRS rules around ground source heat pumps specifically, this is how the math oftentimes works for my clients. Contractor comes back, and the bar on the left is the geothermal incremental first cost, $4 million. Why would we do that? That's crazy. There's other systems, da 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 da. The yellow bar, because the IRS rules include something called dual use equipment, or what we call downstream equipment, that can also be eligible tax credit basis. So the ductwork, the diffusers, the controls, a percentage of the design team's time, all of that can add up to be almost as much as the initial first cost. So in this example, simple math, $4 million first cost, $8 million of tax credit basis, a $4 million tax credit you're getting back at 50% to basically cost neutralize the move to geothermal. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about being able to cost neutralize geothermal with these tools. Now you've got a building that's probably using 30 to 50% less heating and cooling energy, but it's also not burning gas, it's using electricity, which is 3 to 4 times more expensive. So pairing these systems, as you've heard throughout the presentations, is often very advantageous. Next slide, please. LIHTC and the IRA, specifically the ITC in this case, net positive to the capital stack. There are some pretty cool things you can do. So you can double dip on LIHTC and investment tax credit basis. So $4 million of geothermal expenditures is ITC basis. It's also another $4 million of LIHTC basis, generating both forms of tax equity in the structure. And not so with historic tax credits. You can't double count the same dollars for both programs, but with LIHTC and the ITC, you can. In qualified census tracts, that additional basis earns a 1.3x multiplier to generate additional tax equity. And custom utility allowances. You've heard about monetizing these custom utility allowances. It's proving out that the building's going to use less energy. Landlords are able to keep the delta as additional rent, which generates more net operating income, which generates more loan proceeds to help pay for the project. And of course, operating expense improvements by doing net metering in the units and having very efficient common areas as well. Next slide, please. You should be more competitive in the chase for LIHTC credits. These advanced sustainability features and knowing how to pay for them, we think makes you more competitive in most programs. In my mind, and I coach clients this all the time, the ITC, because there's no limit, because there's no application, there's no one that's going to tell you no. If it's on the plan, it's going to be a committed source of funds. So in my state housing finance agency, committed sources of funds get you more points. And it should also, as another source of funds, decrease the subsidy required per unit. Next slide, please. And of course, we're going to get to some math. This may be a little small for some folks. Real quickly here, this shows a baseline HVAC option of $3 million and an upgraded geothermal option with all the downstream equipment of $7 million. So a net incremental cost of $4 million. On the ITC side, in a LIHTC structure at 83 cents on the dollar, it's going to generate $2.9 million of equity. On the LIHTC side, using that same $4 million basis, that's the double dip. You run through the math here, it generates another $1.7 million of equity. So you're $4.6 million of equity generated off of a $4 million cost. This client had an additional $750 in his budget as an upgrade, as an add alternate, and said, hey, that I'm going to basically throw at this additional cost as well. Now I've got $5.3 million to pay for $4 million increase. Next slide. I don't think we'll have time to get into 45L and all the other details, the home energy rebates, et cetera, but please feel free to reach out. This stuff is complicated, it's convoluted. It's tough to understand in this very cross-disciplinary manner. But I would say one of the key things, don't get stuck in the first cost trap. because these tools are on a tax basis, they're tax treatments. So you need to be thinking about tax affected cash flows, which is not how lenders generally think of things and not how developers and investors generally think of things. But there's so much goodies on the tax side. We need to run tax affected cash flows and look at this in a more nuanced manner than just first cost versus energy savings, because there's some real synergies when you can get this right. And I think we have a couple minutes for questions. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Colin and Monty. I know we sped through this all today, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I know we have a few minutes left, so we'll try to answer some. Anything that we don't get to, we will be putting together a mini report that we'll be sharing at our happy hour on June 5th. So if you're attending the AIA conference in Boston, please join us for that. Really excited. Next week will be the final installment of our webinar series for now, with the LA, California regional context. So please be sure to join us for that. You can find all the details on New York's page, or head over to AILA's website directly to register. But I know we have one question in the chat about how do we change PACE in New York City to just convince banks to actually work with PACE financing and work. And Monty, you can take it away on that front.
Yeah, I've got two quick comments or data points for you. 15 years ago, when we stood up PACE in Minnesota at the St. Paul Port Authority, we thought senior lender consent was going to be the death of the program before it ever got off the ground. 350 deals later, I think we had 3 or 4 senior lenders just say absolutely no outright. There's a myriad of players in the debt markets that are more comfortable as these programs have gotten more mature over the years. Specifically in New York, I just reached out to my guy with PACE Loan Group, a national PACE lender, Robbie Pincus. He's headquartered in New York there, to ask him what was going on. And this question of senior lender consent always comes up. He said, Monty, you've got to remember and make sure you tell your clients, over their portfolio of work, they've come across 1,200 PACE-friendly senior lenders. So oftentimes senior lenders have pain points about PACE because they've heard of it, but I would ask 2 questions of a senior lender. What are your thoughts on PACE? Will you consider it in the capital stack? And have you ever done a deal with PACE? Have you ever used it? Because their sensibility of it might be very different because they have never actually done it. And the PACE lenders, folks like myself, there's a lot of smart PACE folks around the country. PACENation.org is the national lobbying body for PACE, and I would encourage you to check out PACENation.org. They've got a great article I point to all the time saying senior lenders find opportunity in PACE, and it's like dispelling the 6 myths of PACE, kind of. But happy to go down that rabbit hole if anybody who wants to reach out.
Amazing. Well, I know we're at time, so thank you all so much for joining us. Please come next week for the webinar on the LA context and join us in Boston on June 5th for the happy hour. Thanks, everyone.